Hello, this is the FCI Podcast. I'm Attila, Márton, and today's episode, Aging of Dogs. I have three guests today who give us a deeper insight into the current scientific findings. First of all, I would like to welcome Enikő Kubinyi, who is a senior researcher at the Department of Ethology at Eötvös Loránd University, also known as Alta University in Budapest. She has established the Senior Family Dog Project to study the cognitive aging of dogs using behavioral, genetic, and neuroscientific approaches. Borbála Turcsán received her PhD in ethology at Alta, studies personality as a postdoc at VetMD Uni Vienna, and she is the head of the behavior branch in the Senior Family Dog Project. And last but not least, we have Ivaylo Iotchev with us, who is an expert in brain, conducting EEG studies. He studied psychology in the Netherlands and neuroscience in Germany before joining Alta. The Senior Family Dog Project was, I would say, a breakthrough project, as the aging of dogs has not been studied before, or not that thoroughly. What is the story behind, and what was and what is the objective of the project?
Yeah, good morning. The story has begun in 2016 when we received a grant from the European Research Funding, an ERC grant, and the European Research Council. And as you've said, this initiative was new from the perspective that family dogs haven't been really studied before. Laboratory dogs have been studied though, but we thought that the family dog would be very important to study because of two reasons. One is that actually they live with us in the very same environment, and their aging processes are very similar to that of humans. So they could be a good animal model for studying human aging, much better ones than the laboratory animals. So that was one reason. The other was that there are many dogs in Europe. So 87 million dogs, more than children. And in our culture, dogs are very important to humans. So most people regard them as family members. And the aging of dog is a huge financial and also an emotional burden on them. So these were the two main reasons what we've explained to the European Research Council, and they found it convincing. And due to their fund, we could establish the Senior Family Dog Project in Budapest. And since then, actually, other initiatives has begun. So, for example, in the United States, the Dog Aging Project has very similar aims than we do, and they were also established in 2016, absolutely independently from us, and now I have to say that they grew much bigger, and we try to collaborate, of course, and I think I will talk about one of our research later on.
And what were the findings? And because I think it is seemingly a very simple topic, aging. We get old. Everyone gets old. I mean, humans, dogs, cats, hamsters, whoever. But so many things happen when we age, and I talked about in the introduction that there is an aspect from neuroscience, cognitive behavior, genetics, etc. I think it is a bit hard to find the starting point. But when you started the research, what was the starting point? What areas you started to examine on scientific approach?
All practically.
I am an ethologist myself, as Bori is also an ethologist. So ethology was our main focus at the beginning. But as you have mentioned in the introduction, we also had genetic approach and neuroscientific approaches as well. And Yeah, as you mentioned, it is very difficult to start. We used two types of method, cross-sectional approach first. So we compared young and old animals from these three main regards, and also a longitudinal approach. So we asked some of the dog owners who already had old dogs, older than 8 years old, to participate in some behavioral studies, and we retested them regularly, and we wanted to find out what kind of changes can be seen there. And I think here Bori could mention one of her studies where she found
actually plenty of them, but just to add something for the whole project design, it was always the aim from the very beginning. It's not to follow only the behavioral part or only the genetic part, only the neuroscientific part, but practically all of them from the same dogs. So we collected a kind of a very, very enthusiastic group of more than 100 dog owners, with most of them, 2/3 of them with aged dogs, who then came back to the taking part of a long behavior test 3 or 4 times over the course of 2 or 3 years. And then they took part in EEG measures, and some of them even in fMRI measures, and we got them DNA samples and different other saliva samples, hair samples, microbiome samples, etc., etc. And the aim always was to try to combine all these approaches to be able to link the behavioral changes with age to all the physiological changes with age. But of course, as Enikő mentioned, I'm mostly an ethologist, so my part was the behavioral measures in this case. And what my main and let's say my favorite study was that is what about the personality change of the animals. And our own study, together actually with previous studies, show that the personality of the dogs changes over their life course and changes a lot. And typically dogs became less active, less curious, less excitable, less reactive, less trainable, less playful, less motivated, less attentive, and so on. And actually there is a very, very good parallel between the manifestation of aging, the behavioral manifestation of aging between dogs and humans. Because as you can see, we also became lazy and boring and very, very hard to be impressed as we get older, and our learning skills decrease and our attention span decrease, and we are definitely less playful. And because of this, studying the behavioral changes in dogs was very interesting for us at least. But the interesting part of this study was that when we said personality changes with age, the result was that it was not always that it changes with old age, but it changes throughout the life course. And it's not not always the very end of the life when personality starts to change, but mostly in the middle age. So either it's very young age or basically at the end of the middle age, and it's not at the very end. Very end is usually just a gradual decline.
Oh, that's what I wanted to ask. That it is a simple question. When can you consider a dog to be old or senior?
Well, that's actually a very good question, because it is not defined. So there is no definition of being old. There are life stages in dogs, just as in humans. But because there is such a huge difference, 50-fold difference in size between the different breeds, and a huge difference in growth rate and whatever, these life changes are practically breed specific. So at what age can a dog be considered, I don't know, adolescent or young adult or whatever. And that's why we have no definition of when a dog became old. So at what point of their life can a dog be considered a senior dog or a geriatric dog? And because all these behavioral and physiological changes are gradually built up, you cannot see that at one point, yesterday my dog was active and excitable and playful, and today it's not. So this is the exact change of this is the point when my dog became old. So it's somehow just at one point, the owners realized that my dog has problems climbing the stairs and sleeps more during the day, and definitely harder to motivate. And it seems it's much harder to train. And then at this point, you kind of realize that, yes, my dog became old.
Can I say, sorry, just go on.
There's another issue that there are huge breed differences. So actually small sized dogs can live up to twice as long as large dogs. So for example, a Great Dane usually lives up to 7 or 8 years. So that's the whole lifespan, sadly. But for example, the Border Terriers expected lifespan is 14 years old. So this is another reason why it is very difficult to say that, after the age of 8 years, the dog is old.
Not just that, but it's also a problem that lifespan is not everything. So it might be possible that, I don't know, a toy poodle lives up to 16 years of age, but also start to aging at 6, just as Great Danes. And that's why we, again, don't know, because we have not yet, at least, kind of breed-specific aging curves of different behaviors or whatever, when we can actually pinpoint that this is the age around which a dog seems to change more in their behavior. And maybe this is the point when we can start to consider that the deterioration in the behavior kind of drops down in a steeper slope. And then you can say that maybe this is the point of senior state. But it's definitely hard, and we do lack research in this direction so far. Maybe we will contribute later.
Can I say that in case my dog starts to behave differently, not that cooperative, it doesn't want to be that playful all the time, etc. Can I say this as a normal change in the life of the dog? And when can I say that it is a kind of disorder, or something which is a negative thing, and you should do something about that? Can I set up a barrier to say that this is normal because this is part of aging, and this is abnormal, which is also related to aging?
Well, now you ask a very, very good question, because again, this is not clearly defined as of yet, but you are very right that there is normal and there are abnormal changes with age. And again, what we currently lack in the literature, again, is a detailed description of what a normal age-related change should look like. So what could be considered normal aging? What could be normally expected? Yes, the motivation will decline, the activity will decline, curiosity will decline, and so on. But how much? And exactly when? So if the dog, I don't know, it not only became less active, but completely stops moving, I don't know, and not only sleeps a bit more during the day, but sleeps, I don't know, 20 hours. Maybe it's too much. So what is the amount, and when is the time? So what is the dynamics of this change, which the owner should expect? And when the dog seriously deteriorates from this path, then maybe this is the cause to actually go to a vet and maybe have a checkup. For example, in our own study, we studied border collies with a behavior test, and we checked the wide age range of these dogs, and we studied their personality. And among the more than 200 border collies, we identified 4 individuals, aged individuals, who were so out of range of all the other dogs. Then we decided that these dogs probably have, let's say, an age-related disorder. Because all 4 of these dogs were above 12 years of age, and their activity level was at the level of a 1-year-old border collie. They have extremely high activity level and extremely low problem-solving ability. And all these 4 dogs were with the very, very bottom of problem-solving ability and very, very top of activity level. And so they were typically those dogs when you could say that they do not follow, let's say, normative trajectory of aging, and probably they have serious cognitive problems.
These dogs haven't read the literature. They had no idea how they should be aging. Yes, there are always. I think it is always good to have exceptions, because it shows that how not that simple it is. I mean, I was just asking a very simple question: what is normal and what is abnormal? And and behavior is really, really complex thing. It has the genetic background and it has the neuroscientific background. And so what is happening in the brain and within the neural path when dogs start to age?
Yeah, so I'm responsible for this mostly at the department. Of course, we have some other colleagues which also work with the brain. But first to say one thing is that slightly goes into the previous question. There's, of course, this huge variation in individual life stories, but exactly here lies the importance of the project, because in humans and in dogs, we all expect that we will gradually decline as we age, but some individuals do this so rapidly and so much suffering is involved that we can see what we call dementia, and specifically Alzheimer's dementia in humans. That's clearly defined in humans, although even there's always this question of how do we draw the lines. And dogs have a very similar disorder. Even though with dogs it's more difficult, in some cases it's just very clear that the level of disorientation, the level of loss of function is so encompassing and so much quicker than you would expect in a gradual decline. It's usually what we understand as healthy aging. It's a slow gradual decline. And very often healthy aging individuals will not die because of that decline of function, but they will either have a heart attack or something will happen to them that ends their life, but it's not this dying brain. And here we come to the brain, right? So the brain of the dog is one of these things that have been actually studied very little in the past, at least the behaving living brain when it comes to dog aging. Because that was one aspect that made the project unique, is that we're studying free living dogs that live among humans. I mean, not laboratory dogs. They're of course also not completely free, but we're studying dogs in one of their nature environments, which is the human environment. The other thing that is unique about the project is to look at the physiology of the living organism in the detail that we did. And so there's at least 3 or 4 physiological domains, one could say, in our project, which 3 of them have to do with the brain, and one of them indirectly and has to do with the composition of gut bacteria. We call it the microbiome. So the other 3 domains, which are more directly linked to the brain, is to study the brain using fMRI, for which the department has a long tradition, and was one of the first places, if not the first place, where dogs were trained to sit still in an fMRI scanner. So this is a machine that can take an image of the brain and sometimes very quickly several images in real time. And it's a complex technology using magnetic resonance. And then there's EEG, which is my preferred method, and it's a very classical method. We have so-called electrodes. They're very sensitive devices which pick up changes in electrical potential on the scalp of a human or dog's head, which are caused by the brain's activity. And then there's, of course, and I think Enikő will actually talk more about this. There's a huge brain and tissue bank that we started building around dogs. And so from each of these domains, we learned some things that seem to be changing in dogs just as they change in humans as they age. Of course, at this point, many of these things describe the aging process in general, because this had to be done. Since there was a huge gap in the physiological topics, we're not yet at the point where we can say, this is what healthy aging looks like, and this is a dog which is heading for dementia. I mean, in some cases, we can actually say it. We had a study on the proteins which build up in human and dog brains during dementia. And this study did show that the dogs whose owners report symptoms that veterinarians would identify as dementia, they did have the same level of the amyloid beta protein, which is the protein associated with Alzheimer's dementia, in a higher concentration in their brain. Concerning the other physiological topics, we have at least a confirmation that the dog is very similar to humans regarding a lot of physiological changes associated with aging, but also importantly with brain function. For example, I study patterns of brain activity with EEG that occur during sleep, but which are known to correlate, to associate with the memory function of the animals, and which are also found to change with age in humans. And so I'll try to stay off as many technical labels as possible, but so the pattern I'm studying is called sleep spindle. And we know that in humans, there's two types of this pattern, two types of sleep spindle. And we could confirm for the dog this to be the case as well, which is very good argument for the dog, maybe one day, that the findings of the dog can one day translate to humans, because cats and sheep, for example, do not have two different types of sleep spindles. Also, currently, because of our work, the dog is one of 4 species in which we know that the occurrence of the sleep spindle events correlate with memory performance. Before, it had been shown only in mice, rats, and humans. Now we know this to be the case in dogs. Of course, one maybe would expect this to be universally the case, but then again, there's some species that do not display sleep spindles at all. For birds and reptilian brains, the existence of this brain pattern has not been confirmed. Then I'll make a little round here regarding my answer, but then there's also this physiological topic about the composition of the gut microbiome. And here, there are bacteria whose abundance in humans is associated with dementia. And we found that if dogs have less of this bacteria in their guts, I think they're called actinobacteria, then they also perform better on a shorter memory test. It's also a very interesting finding, especially since the relationship between gut health and brain health is in general a very new field of study with very few human and animal findings so far.
In that case, can I say that, for example, nutrition takes a huge part in the, if I can say, process and quality of aging, and because microbiome is, if I'm right, it is an area where we have a lot of new studies. We started to understand a lot, but we still have a lot of missing information at the moment. But it really takes part in many health and welfare related topics.
Yeah, you are absolutely right in this. So there are some tentative data that some supplements might help, but actually, Bori, I think Bori, you could tell a study where some dog foods targeted for senior dogs with specific supplements have not yielded
but
positive
it just practically calls the attention to the fact that at least previously these food supplements, vitamins and any additional things which are advertised that you should give it to your, aging dogs or whatever, and then it will keep the health and will provide better. So just as in case of human vitamin complexes, everything will be better if you just give your dog this pill. Now, actually, one of the food manufacturers decided to test it out, and not only on laboratory dogs, which are kept in the same environment with the same diet and so on and so on. So practically not a very good model for real pet dogs, which live in a different environment, some of them outside, some of them inside. They get completely different diet, of course. So some of them eat raw food, others eat dry food, others eat a completely mixed diet, some of them eat human food and so on. So they decided to test their supplement on a group of pet dogs and with this variable background. And they did a cognitive test with the dogs, if I remember correctly, aged more than 6. They were also all of them border collies. And they maintained this supplement-enriched diet for a year. And the dogs were tested before they entered in the diet and after 1 year. They follow in the diet. And practically the dogs were eating only this diet and the control group were eating their own diet. And although they found that the cognitive performance of the dogs changed with age, as they expected, but they could not find a difference between the diet group, so who got this supplement, and the control group who did not get this supplement. And this really points out that before somebody advertises these food supplements as having the general beneficial effect for all the dogs in the world, they need to test it out on a various sample of dogs, and not only on a small group of dogs who might actually be in need of this specific supplement. Because this lack of beneficial effect of this supplement does not mean that this supplement does not have a beneficial effect of a specific small group of dogs who is in need of this supplement. But if the general population is not in need of this supplement, they will kind of overshadow all this thing. The same way as if you have enough C vitamin, additional C vitamin, it will not have a beneficial effect. So based on this, you may say C vitamin has no beneficial effect whatsoever on humans, which you cannot say, of course. So this is the same thing here, that it just really calls attention to the fact that we don't know much about the actual real life effect of these food supplements, because they are mostly have been tested before on laboratory dogs. And only now do they just start to test it on pet dogs.
Well, we can say a positive result as well related to feeding regime, and it is about calorie restriction. So there are studies, although only in laboratory dogs, sadly. We should repeat it on family dogs as well, if we would be able to find volunteering owners. So on Labrador retrievers, it was found that calorie restriction, meaning 20% less food than the normal portion, will elongate the lifespan of these dogs with almost 2 years. So that was tested in a laboratory in standard circumstances, and the results were very, very obvious. So if you probably feed less food to your dogs, then it will give you positive results.
Advertise to give it less food to your dog for one thing, because their metabolism slows down as they age. So they actually do not need as much food as they previously needed. Not only their activity level, but also the metabolism slows down. So, and this is exactly the time when the dogs usually get overweight, because they move less, but they eat just the same amount, and their metabolism is slowing down.
Yeah, and there is another factor which is associated with longer lifespan, and this is paying, especially in among females. So according to the most recent data, females who are neutered live at least a 6 month longer life, so live 6 months longer than those who are intact. And another, I think, well-known effect is that inbreeding has a very negative effect on lifespan and on health span as well.
Yeah, but in that case, you could say size has the largest effect, with practically twofold difference in the life expectancy between the largest and the smallest dog. So you can do anything. If you have a 60 kilogram large dog, you could do whatever you want. It will not live 16 years old.
Yeah. We were talking a lot about dementia. Ivo has mentioned it. And this is an umbrella term, and Alzheimer disease was mentioned, and beta amyloid peptide in the background. And as Ivo has said, we have found the association between the cognitive dysfunction score and the level of this peptide in the brain. But there are also vascular problems, and there can be in the background. So because of that, we have to mention that physical exercises are very, very important throughout the lifespan, but especially in old age.
And there's also a certain how to say, silver lining about the lack of confirmation for the role of food supplements in house-kept dogs, because this is actually huge support for why it is important that we start looking outside of the laboratories and into dogs that were kept at home, that are kept at home, since actually laboratory studies were successful in showing the effect of nutrition. There are studies that found nutrition helping the aging dogs to avoid cognitive problems, and they were all only from laboratory populations. So it's also very important to say that the negative results in our case are also very important
much harder
step in the right direction.
And just because we talked about a lot of environmental elements in the life of dog, which has a kind of effect on aging. I mean, can I say the quality of aging? I mean, how many problems the dog and the owner would face. We talked about nutrition. We talked about how you should change the nutrition regime after a certain age because the dog is not that active. But please confirm that very important from the first day how the dog does. So okay, after a certain period when your dog starts to age, you have to have a different kind of approach. But the previous approach, how active life your dogs had, how healthy it was fed, it all matters. Okay, it changes, but it is still the same animal. It had a biological build-up. I know it's not that sounds so good, but if you haven't fed or kept your dog properly for example 5, 6, 7 years, it will be really complicated to turn your dog into a healthier version of itself.
Definitely. But as you just mentioned, this once the dogs start to age, things change. We found in our own study, as well as other people and other researchers have found it, that it's very typical for owners that once they kind of realize that their dog is old, that they not only reduced, more or less stop all activities like walking, playing, training, whatever, because for one thing, they think that their old dogs no longer need this kind of thing. Let it rest. It kind of likes to relax. You just let it sleep on the couch. It does not need to. On the other hand, they actually think that it causes pain to the dog just to walk. It hurts their joints and it has arthritis and whatsoever, and it doesn't need anymore. And that is a large problem, because this is exactly the time when the dog needs these things the most. And I wouldn't say that, yes, okay, go for an agility round and to teach your dog to catch frisbees and whatever, slow measured walks. But the dog does need this. And this is the problem that most owners practically stop these activities once the dog became senior. And the lack of this stimulation could actually lead to faster aging and faster deterioration. Because at this point, this is the only source of stimulation, mental and physical stimulation for the dog. A normal, very, very slow walk. Yes, it might hurt a little bit the dog's joint, but if you ask any physiotherapists, stopping movement just because it hurts is usually not the solution. So you should keep moving, and your aged dog should keep moving, because it will make matters worse. So if I can say something about prevention, how to prevent it, the first thing is not to drastically change the lifestyle which you have lived. So if you have lived an active lifestyle with your dog and trained and played a lot, continue slower, not as enthusiastically, avoid large movement and sit up and stand up, sit down, stand up, things like this, jumping ups whatsoever, but continue the stimulation, because otherwise your dog will be just like, I don't know, put in a geriatric home and be left there without any stimulation, and it causes more harm than it does good.
It just gave me the idea, it just gave me the idea that how important it is that how we humans as an individual consider how to age, what to do later when I start to have backache. If I started to stop any kind of physical activities, when I started to have backaches in the morning, oh my God!
But it makes matters worse. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I know, and of course, exactly. I know that I don't go out on weekends like I did some years ago, because it is different. So I think we humans should also learn how to age properly, because it is important.
I agree. I tend to say when I'm asked about the dog aging, I've always mentioned that dogs are good models of human aging. And I think just talking about this increases awareness about our own aging and about the protective effects. And it is very, very important. So we can see basically our future when we look at our own aging dogs, and yes, it can motivate us to go out and also to socialize, because Bori has mentioned briefly, but that mental training, social life is also very, very, very important. It is especially for humans, but dogs are also social animals. So the social life is the most important aspect. The lack of it, loneliness, has the biggest disadvantage on health, even more than alcoholism and smoking cigarettes. So having friends, talking to them, and dogs can help in it, of course, with their regular walks. You can meet other people out there on the street. It's very, very important. We had extensive surveys with a lot of people as well, and we have also seen that training, so going out and training the dogs, doing agility and all kind of dog-related activities, has also a protective effect on the dog's mental health during the last period of life. So those dogs who did a lot of trainings during their life course were in a much better mental state than those who did not do much. So that is also important to mention. And there was another important factor, trauma. So it was very obvious that those dogs who were traumatized at some point in their life, for example, they were adopted from shelters, struggled more during.
Usually, this is the part when you can't really do much. So
you
usually do not traumatize your dog on purpose.
Know it. So I mean, to be. But we are always talking about sad things. I would like to mention that the majority of the dogs show healthy aging. Yeah. So also the signs of dementia. I mean, among dogs who are above 10, so around 11, only third of dogs, so some kind of, or at least one sign of dementia. And I don't know whether it is obvious for everyone what we are talking about. What is canine cognitive dysfunction, or should we elaborate?
It has specific symptoms. Maybe we should mention that at least they have these 5 typical symptoms which the owners need to be aware of.
Please let's discuss this just for those who are not that involved in the topic, because I think this is important. It is an important area. Me personally, I've heard cognitive dysfunction in many cases, but I could not explain properly what it is exactly about. So I think it is a useful explanation.
Well, should I or Enikő?
Go on, Bori. I will add something if you missed some points. Yes.
All right. So we have this so-called DYSHE, if I remember correctly, this abbreviation of the typical symptoms of this canine cognitive dysfunction, which is the dog is dog is prone to get lost in familiar spaces, so it's disoriented. It seems to be clumsy, so it knocks items off accidentally, stumbles on the stairs, gets stuck in a corner or between the bed and the wall, and so on. So it actually lose its physical fitness, let's say so, gets frightened by familiar people and familiar places, so does not recognize familiar things which he or she did previously. Changes in sleeping habits, so restlessness during night, and sleeps much more than normal during daytime. And finally, they have elimination problems, so practically house training problems, accidents, which normally do not happen in the inside. So the pee and poo happens. And these are, at least the combination of these symptoms is what we can consider as a good sign of canine dementia. Each and individual symptoms could be caused by other illnesses. So for example, I don't know, elimination problems could be also a sign of kidney problems or whatever, but the combination of these symptoms together is a very, very good indicator that it might be this canine cognitive dysfunction syndrome, and it's worth veterinary check just to make sure whether it is that or not, because there could be some help, at least if we know the diagnosis.
And do we know, based on the research and heading a bit back to neuroscience and genetics, do we understand a bit about the reason behind the causes of such a serious decline in cognitive functions? Because you mentioned human dementia, and it sounds to be a similar pattern, and human dementia is a huge problem in human medicine, and it is a horrible thing. I think all of us would like to avoid in their lives, or not just in your case, of any beloved ones, because matter. So what are your findings during the research? Anyone?
Guys.
Well, I mentioned before that we do know that the same proteins build up in the brain, the same plaques appear in dog and human brains when the health is headed for dementia, when the mental health is headed for dementia. Although to connect this specifically with the canine cognitive score, basically asking the owners about the patients, about the symptoms, which Bori just described. This is rather a new finding, but generally looking for those proteins in aging dogs is one of the more universally studied aspects of physiology that had already been part of the old attempts, even though back in the day there was not much research on EEG, fMRI in aging dogs, and so we did not know much about what happens in the living brain. There's still a lot to speculate about the other biomarkers. The sleep spindles which I study, they tend to disappear completely in some Alzheimer patients. They're completely gone. Of course, so far, because my own research on this topic is still relatively in the beginning, we haven't yet drawn a line between healthy and pathologically aging dogs with regard to studying sleep spindles, for example. But here I can also kind of connect this question with the previous one, as we were still talking about effects on aging of different practices. And of course, humans and dogs are very similar, but there's something that uniquely happens to dogs, at least more often than to humans, which is the spaying, the neutering of the animals. And so this is a maybe a two-edged sword. It is, of course, noteworthy, as Enikő mentioned, that the lifespan of some dogs increases as they're neutered. But personally, I'm not so sure that neutering is a good thing for the brain health. I do see, for example, that neutering affects the expression of sleep spindles, and not in a way that is usually associated with good things. Although this has to be tested more directly, because for the time being, with a few exceptions, or one exception, better to say, for the time being, most of the work studies the effects of aging and the association with cognition separately for sleep spindles in dogs. We have one study which makes a more direct link between the dog's aging and the cognition and the sleep spindles, basically bringing all the three things together. But there are some open questions. And so I think, especially for breeders, since this is going to be a big part of the audience today, it's important to know that neutering isn't a simple decision. It's complex. It has different effects on the health of the animals, and it will have different effects on the aging of the animals as well.
May I add, Attila, something? So to answer your previous question about the background of dementia or canine cognitive dysfunction, we don't know much about it. The research has just started, as Ivo has mentioned. The important thing here is that we don't know much about human dementia either. So we know how it looks like, but don't know how to prevent it, except the common knowledge that do trainings and socializing, as we just mentioned. And the problem is that the laboratory animals, which are usually used for studying aging and neurodegenerative disorders, including dementia, and the main reason of it, Alzheimer's disease, they are just not good enough to study this phenomenon because it is very, very complex. It has a genetic background, but also many, many environmental causes. And because of this, during the past, let's say 30 years, researchers were not able to develop any medicines against Alzheimer's disease to prevent it or to treat it at least. And this is why the dog model is very important, because this is the kind of animal where these symptoms develop spontaneously. We see it in cats too, and also in killer whales. But of course, you cannot study whales in a large numbers, and it is not very easy to study cats either. So dogs are very good for this kind of research. And what we believe is that using the family dogs, which live in a very complex environment as we do, and which is a very big genetic diversity, will help us to develop the medicines needed to treat and prevent Alzheimer's disease.
I think you mentioned that you started the senior dog project in 2015-16, and for me, it is incredible and a bit unbelievable that you managed to study so many things, and you have so many really important information about dog aging, which can be used to improve the welfare of dogs. You can give practical advice with scientific background to everyday dog owners, how to keep their dog properly throughout their lives to really maintain a healthy old age for family dogs. And meanwhile, you have findings which can be used in human medicine. And I'm sure you mentioned, all of you mentioned certain parts that we don't know a lot about this yet, and we should also research that. As much as I know about science, this is how it goes. You get an answer for a question, and that immediately crops up 10 other questions to let's see and see what we found. we find. And I know this is a really simple question and very complex to answer, but what are the future plans? I mean, what are those main areas you personally find interesting as scientists, which would be important to study further? You mentioned certain part throughout the whole discussion, but
probably we have different for each of us. So
that's what I wanted to say. It is good that you can just, all of you separately can say that which are those topics which you find personally the most interesting for you as a scientist.
May I start, and then Ivo and Bori, you can add your part. So we've been talking about the canine brain and tissue bank, which have been developed during this ERC funding. It is still going on. Currently, we've got 163 brains in this bank, donated by owners, dog owners, who have decided to euthanize their dog because of health reasons. So these are, of course, mainly old dogs. And based on these tissues, we would like to run a lot of molecular genetic studies. Paper was just recently was published. Here we have compared the RNA sequences, total RNA sequences. So we call it transcriptome of old and young dogs. And we found many differences. These were basically, interestingly, quantitative differences and not qualitative differences, meaning that the same genes worked or were expressed in the brains of the older and the younger animals, but not at the same rate. Force of them was affected by the age of the dogs. So that is very interesting, and I really hope that we can go on with this and we can find some dogs with actual dementia, because we have compared the canine cognitive dysfunction score with the beta, like amyloid beta level, but we currently miss the demented dogs. Another interesting thing related to the brain bank is that in the recent years, we started to be very much interested in brachycephalic dogs, so dogs with short nose. And we know that their brains are very different from that of other dogs. So we plan to study transcriptomes in these dogs and other issues as well. And one other thing related to genetics, that I've got a favorite project. We started to collect DNA from very old dogs. One was 26 years old when he died, and the average age of the family dogs when they die is 13 years old. We haven't mentioned this yet, so 27 is really amazing. The other individual was 22. And we have investigated the DNA of these dogs, and we found that those genes were very unique. Gene variants were very unique to these dogs, which were related to altering other genes or influencing the expression of other genes. And I hope that we can go on with this research. So if you happen to know anyone who has a dog above the age of 20, please send us the DNA. It's absolutely painless process. We just need ear cleaning cotton buds, and they can be spent by post. So sorry.
Okay. Do you want to go?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can take over. Yes. Well, for me as a brain researcher, aging I find a very helpful topic to understand the brain in general, because it affects so many different brain functions and in a different sequence and speed they deteriorate, even in healthy aging subjects. But I think if we if we want to go specifically into what I hope we're headed for, and then specifically with regards to aging, and I kind of implied it in some of my answers. I think it would be nice at some point to be able to study the difference between healthy and pathological aging and all the difficulties associated with drawing the line between these two groups. They have been abundantly mentioned today, but still it is a very important point of progress, even though it might of course take very long, because to some extent, and I mentioned it with regard to physiology, but in general, with regards to clinical topics, the dog is not studied as much as some other animal models. Rats and mice are still dominating the translational research. And we know more about the brain of a rat than we do about the brain of a human, for example. And so I do hope that as far as dogs are concerned, we can first get to that level where we have a really good map of what is happening in aging in general. And this is what we've been working on quite successfully. And then hopefully one day we can sooner or later make that bridge to specifically draw the line between healthy and pathological aging. And to some extent, it's been happening, as we mentioned, with the comparison of cognitive dysfunction scores and the accumulation of bad proteins in the brain. But yeah, I personally hope that we'll see a bit more of this in the future.
Okay.
Lori.
So probably it's my turn. So as an ethologist, again, and as a personality maniac, it might not be surprising that what I am interested in mostly is the individual differences in the behavioral chain. So practically in aging. And there are individual differences in aging, which we actually found in our own study once, that, for example, dogs which even in younger age has an already kind of so-called matured personality. So they were less active than their peers with the same age, less curious, more oriented to problems. So kind of this, mature feel. And these dogs did not change as much as all the others over time, because it seems that they already possess the personality type which they should at later age, so they did not need to change. At least in humans, they found the same. So people also change in specific directions, and it's a basically general change in all humans, that we became less neurotic, more agreeable, and more conscientious as we age. And people who are less neurotic, more agreeable, and more conscientious in younger age do not need to change as much as people who are definitely less this type. And they explain this, that it is because people need to fill in different roles as they age. So in younger age, they can afford to be this type, but as they age, they get more responsibility and family and harder work and so on and so on. So they need to fill a different role. And for this different role in the society, this personality type is what it fits. So they need to become more agreeable and more conscientious and less neurotic just to fill in the society. The interesting thing is that we see the same in dogs, but we can't say that they need to fill a different role in the society, because we cannot really say it. But it might be possible that they do need to fill in a somewhat different role for the owners as well. So what the owners can tolerate for a young dog, they can't tolerate, or will not tolerate it from an older dog. But again, they will tolerate this behavior again from a very old dog, because very old dogs can do anything. And this is what I'm really very much interested in, that how, what motivates these individual differences in the aging phenotype. So why does different individuals age differently, and what could be the motivation and reason behind these individual differences?
So I'm sure for the following years, and I hope, because it means that all of you managed to study these areas. So I hope we'll have enough materials to read in different scientific papers, because and for me it was fascinating to listen to all of you now about your future plans and which areas you are interested in, because I could hear three scientists talking about the same, more or less the same topic from three absolutely different approach and absolutely different aspect. And it perfectly shows how huge this area is. And it was a fascinating discussion. I really enjoyed it. And I thank you for all of these researches, because it gives us a lot of knowledge how to properly keep our dogs in the future, what we need to consider to understand our dogs better, because without being conscious dog owners, we cannot be really responsible. Sometimes it works that knee-jerk reflex can make someone be a good dog owner, but conscious knowledge is always necessary. So I do thank all of you for being my guest today at this episode. I received a lot of new information, which just made me sure that this is a huge area, a huge topic, and I'm really anticipating your future findings related to the topic or any ethology topic. So thank you again for your time and being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you.